everybody for showing up. Appreciate it. Martha, sorry we couldn't change the time, but it was kind of too late.
Okay.
Okay. For my report, I'm just going to say we don't really have a formal agenda. However, we will be reviewing the Tioga Street possibilities, and then we will be going into an executive session to discuss other options. That being said, I'm going to turn it over to Jason and let Jason do the review.
Sure. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
You all received the last, I think, PowerPoint presentation we did with all of the scenarios. I can go through them again or not. It's up to the group. You've had a time to review them. I think I could just give you an update as to the use of the property to date. So right now, we continue to use the property for some parking. Earlier on in the process, HR did regular counts over there, and I would say at any point in time, it's probably between 10 to 20 vehicles of county staff that would be utilizing it, 20 probably being the high mark, 20 being the low mark. This was pre-COVID counts, so you would get a fuller understanding of the use of it. Obviously, both buildings are not being used. They're locked. Arel and his team have done there was some, I would say, just preventative maintenance that was done on the red building as well as the dental building. Nothing of any significance, probably a few days worth of work. But we've been able to do some, some issues of broken windows, patching, holes, that type of thing, making sure things are secure. Lighting's been put up as it was, as we talked about probably almost a year ago now. And they continue to when the snow comes, they'll continue to plow it and clear it and ensure there's a pathway from the parking lot into Sear Street and the sidewalks are cleared. Other than that, they go through the building periodically, and there hasn't really been any changes in that. And that's really the existing status of the property. So other than parking use, there really isn't much use right now. Arel, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but I think, but by all means, please do so. You're on mute, Arel.
I know the
You're
board
still muted.
used the dental building briefly.
There you are.
We have received requests from others to use the space. Drew, we did have some vandalism about a month ago. They broke in and took some copper piping from the dental building. So now we try to stop in at least every day to check the buildings. But otherwise, what Jason said is pretty accurate.
If I may, Dave, when you say use the space, what are you talking about? The buildings or the parking or what? You said you had inquiries.
Well, no, Board of Elections, I was just joking. Some employees have requested using the space instead of traveling a distance to their home.
You were joking.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I thought you were serious. I thought maybe you'd had some legitimate inquiries.
No.
There was one other one, and I can't remember. It was a few months ago.
Yeah, it was just a joke.
All right. Thank you.
Did Board of Elections?
Martha, you're muted.
Sorry, thanks. Did Board of Elections use it, Arel?
Yes, they did. And they may be using it again for the general election next month. They still have tables and chairs there.
How's the ventilation then if people are in that building for any period of time? I mean, I assume cleaning is, the rigorous cleaning is happening, but ventilation is an issue with indoor spaces too.
Yeah, the units in that building are working. Our staff are maintaining them. So if people wanted to occupy any of the buildings, we would suggest that one over the red building.
Very good.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going
How's
to say, Dave,
everybody feel? Sorry, Jason.
No, I was just gonna say, it's you know, you tell me what you want me to do. I can zip through it. I cannot. The only action I think, in looking at some of the minutes, the only action the committee took was regarding potential housing on the along the Sears Street side, but that was not a resolution that went forward to the legislature. I don't have the date. I'll see if I can find the date, but I think that was in the notes that Katrina put together for everybody. Yeah, it was in August 8th of 2019. Other than that, the only action the committee took was really what we just talked about with permitting parking, cleaning up, ensuring that there was lighting, and ensuring that the area was clear from snow.
Okay,
Dave, can I ask about a question?
sure, go ahead.
So, Arel, as far as the vandalism with the copper pipes, did that affect, I can't remember if it's radiant heat over there, did that affect the heating system or the water supply?
That was mostly drain pipes, and we replaced those sections, not with copper, but with PVC. So yeah, it wasn't anything to do with the heating system. It was all above the ceiling copper pipe, probably 1 inch and 2 inch. So they were after, I think, the copper so that they could get some money for it.
And we don't have alarm systems in that building. Do we have alarm system? Well, we could bring it up in F&I about maybe what type of alarm systems we have in other buildings. But anyway, I won't bog us down today.
So how's the group feel? Do you want to review the,
Dave, Rich John had a question.
okay, Rich?
Thanks. I would hope we could discuss whether we want to authorize Jason to have some conversation with potential developers of the 3 lots on Sears Street. While we have questions about our timing and everything else, it seemed like the viable scenarios had Sears Street being developed as housing. And I'd like us to at least consider the possibility of moving that along, even if we're uncertain and want to take a longer term approach.
Are you sure we don't want to go into executive session to discuss that? Just want to check.
I would take direction on that, but I think we've talked certainly about the scenarios where we were talking about developing Sears Street. And while because of COVID and everything else, we might be taking longer time on other parts, that seems like something we could at least explore moving on a different timeline.
I don't have a problem talking about it. I really have a problem going ahead with it until we know where we're going with everything. I really would like to know what the overall plan is going to be, and at that point, move forward. Rich, that's kind of my feeling on it, and as I've said before, and you know, I don't know how the rest of the group feels about that, but I'm willing to listen.
Yeah, well, certainly
Martha?
To respond to you, Dave, I don't have a problem with trying to make a total decision. But what I'd rather we not do is just sit on our hands and do nothing until we get a total answer. That I think we're pretty certain that we would be developing Sears Street separately, probably through an independent developer. And I'd like us to be ready to proceed with that as soon as we can. So that's why I'm saying we'd authorize Jason to have conversation and develop the ideas. So we would not be slowed down unduly.
Okay.
Thanks.
Martha was next, then Mike, then Ann, I think.
This is what we're going to go through, right? The scenarios.
Yeah.
That was sent to us, because there's, you know, there are a number of them that do use some of the space on Sears Street. So I guess if that's to be discussed, maybe we should go through these options first. And that would assume we could eliminate some of the options that have parking on Sears. And, you know, I'm not sure I'd be willing to talk about it, but I don't think it's something we should move on yet either. But at the very least, I think maybe we should refresh our memory with these different scenarios.
Now, its basic purpose for the meeting today is to review that, and remind everybody where we were at, and maybe pick a few scenarios that we really like out of that group and put those at the top of the list. So, Mike, go ahead.
Well, Dave, I think, you know, what you're saying is right here. We need to know where we're going, and there's a bunch of things are in play now, I think. Not only are, let me try to say this so we don't get into executive session, but there are these other options that we've been talking about for downtown facilities besides Tioga Street. There is still the idea of renovating the old jail. And there is the possibility of using the existing buildings on Tioga Street for at least temporary quarters should we need to move the county clerk, for example, or another office or offices. Even we wouldn't necessarily have to renovate all of it, but we could renovate some of it over there if necessary. As far as the housing on Tioga Street, I fully understand Rich's desire to see that moved along. That's where he's been with his constituents down there for a long time, and I don't blame him. That's his district. But I agree with what Martha said. We don't want to foreclose some of the things there. For example, I've said all along, I would think that that northwest lot would make a lot of sense for housing, but I'm not sure I'm ready for the two lots south of that. And so I think that all needs to be talked out. And if we move on Tioga Street and for example, decide we're going to have a developer build on that, then we are closing the usage of that property before we've even decided how exactly we're going to use it. So I just think that we need to keep talking about this, and we're right in the middle of a recession caused by COVID, and we don't know how fast we're ever going to come out of that and what we're going to need. Are we going to be a little smaller government? We've eliminated the positions. There's a lot of stuff going on, and I think the reason we have a committee like this, and I'm so happy we do, is because we need to look at all of those options.
Thank you, Mike. Annie?
I would, we did decide, this committee, that we wanted some housing. And as Mike said, we don't know if it's 1, 2, 3, or however a developer wanted, however much land, depends, on how much a developer could put, what they could put over there. But for me, I think our hands are tied until we talk more about other things that we need to talk about in executive session, because that could change some of our thinking around some of our decisions around this property.
Okay. Well, then I guess I'm going to turn it back over to Jason and let him go through some of the scenarios with us and see what we like.
Sounds good. I'll share my screen here. Wait a minute. I'm doing it the wrong way. Hold on. Let me get this right.
You have this problem every time.
I know. I'm sorry. I have a split screen and it I have to use screen 2 to do this. All right. Here we go. Okay. Can you see this?
There
Yes.
you go.
All right. So this is the existing conditions and needs, main courthouse. I don't think much of this has changed, although I do think that the state, since this was done, has confirmed that they eventually want to take the whole building over. So the DA and grand jury room, if we're to make an investment, probably would not be good to invest in that building where they're at now, the main courthouse. And there is a makeshift I say makeshift, there's been an office built for the third county judge. So after this was done before we received that communication from the state. The old jail, it's an inefficient layout. There's overcrowding. It needs to be, it needs improvements. The last major improvements it had, I think, were in the 90s. And there's probably a lot of improvements to workflow that can be done. We have done some improvements on our floor just in terms of layout, but you know, a lot of this is also, some of it was cleaning out that basement area as well. There was some old infrastructure there that would need to be dismantled and taken out as well, and you have the opportunity to expand space as a result of it. Also, there's some ADA issues on the first floor with the back room area that needs to be improved, and there's some other, you know, the elevator, for the lack of a better term, is a death trap from time to time. So there's probably some other overhauls that need to be done with it. Access to services not customer friendly. Again,
Jason, I would say that that's probably not a good characterization of a public elevator. I know that's on the list of elevators that everyone wants to do, but I don't think we should be saying something like that.
You're right, Mike. Access to services are not customer friendly, meaning there's just the challenges in navigating the space. So it's just not a very effective layout for the offices in the county in this building. Lease spaces do not align with departmental needs. So there's other departments. So for example, Office of Human Rights, as well as assigned counsel, were part of this discussion to be shifted either over into the new facility or this facility, depending on the layout. Again, just a little bit of refresher on the actual layout we're talking about. This is the red building right here. This is the dental building. This is the area that we're talking about. This right here and this area. Again, this was created, if you remember, there's kind of a very difficult zoning arrangement, which I think has prohibited a lot of use or other opportunities with this property. Again, no one could just buy this and necessarily use it for parking based on the series of different zoning outlays. The city has an odd circumstance around this where they're not enforcing the zoning, but should someone purchase it, they're then going to enforce it. So there's kind of an odd arrangement of things as a result of this intersection of different zoning outlays. All of the scenarios 1 through 10 include a variety of different office spaces. This is kind of a summary of them, ranging from 32,000 to 46,000 square feet, additional parking spaces plus or minus 25 to 42, housing on Sear Street, a variety of arrangements, whether or not it conforms with the zoning. Now remember, our intention was to try to always conform the best we could with the zoning. Primarily height, I think, was the biggest issue of concern, was height restrictions in that zoning area. So that was, again, trying to try to comply the best we can, although just to be clear, as a higher form of government than the city, you don't have to comply with the zoning code. You're not required to. Includes renovating the red house. The red house, as you recall, is part of this discussion. And in terms of floors with the office building, which would have been the new build. So we'll get into some of the scenarios. This is scenario 1. It's a new building, restoring the older building, which would be the red building, and parking. This is making use of the full lot from a parking perspective. I think this is the arrangement that offers the maximum amount of additional parking. You have your building wrapped around the existing red building. Existing red building is 408 Tioga. A good layout, entryway only from Tioga, no entry or exit from Sear Street. And part of this, again, is to complement the neighborhood and having probably a vegetation buffer along the Sear Street line. 37,000 square feet of office space, and no residential use in this example. Scenario 2 is essentially the same outlay of building, 37,000 square feet, renovating 408, as well as a new construction. Also, potential footprint included a basement, I believe, as well as 3 floors. Because remember, Board of Elections and everybody from Assessment, Board of Elections, ITS would also be relocating over. This also has then a new housing suggestion here where you're having 3 subdivisions of single family homes on Sears Street. And obviously that's taking parking away. So your parking is probably plus or minus 20 to 25 spaces. Again, same entry and exit on Tioga Street. Here's an example. This was examples of what could be built there. INHS is a potential partner with this that we partner a lot with affordable housing. And these would be examples of some new builds they've done in the community. Scenario 3 has townhomes, which may be a little bit more density, but from our perspective in terms of municipal use, it's the same as the prior arrangement. Same footprint of building, same renovation 408, same size of our building, just less parking from the scenario 1, but possibly a little bit more density here. Here are examples of something that could be done in the community as well. Scenario 4 are duplexes. So again, just a different arrangement of housing. Everything else remains the same. And here's an example of a duplex that's been done in the community. Scenario 5 is, I think, similar to what Mike was suggesting with using some of it as a one family or using parts of this as an option for a single family home. Again, building stays the same. Obviously with less housing, you have more parking. And this is another option of using it for one residential use. Here's another scenario which has tandem parking here. So you have the ability to shrink the lot, the lot here. You're rotating the single family home, so it's narrower. You're shrinking the lot a little bit, and you're gaining a little bit of parking to do tandem parking. Not ideal tandem parking, but can be done. Nothing changes here in terms of the size of the structure and square footage. This is again a tandem parking example, but rather than single family units as duplexes. Here is an example where we don't do anything with the 408 Tioga property, and I think you talk about surplusing it, surplusing the red building. It would be demoing the existing dental building, narrowing the building and making a much smaller footprint, 32,000 square foot versus 37 in the past, and then using the rest of the back end of it for parking. This does not have any residential use unless someone were to convert the 408 building into a residential use.
And, excuse me, but that is a real possibility, isn't it? Wouldn't a developer, for example, something like the neighborhood housing group, they've renovated older houses over the years. Might not that be something they could renovate?
It's possible. I don't think you would turn into a single family home though. You'd probably turn into apartments. I don't think the return on investment on a property on a square footage home that size is going to be manageable with creating an affordable housing single family home. Plus, keep in mind this is in the historic district, so you're going to have additional costs related to renovating this property. But it's possible, Mike. I think, like I said, I think if INH were to do something like this, they would probably turn it into multiple apartments.
Jason, didn't this have the other problem of access and parking, et cetera, where just north of the house, is that enough space for a driveway?
It'd be tight, but I think the intent is that there would be some driveway here because this has a long lot.
So because I know we passed a resolution saying that we shouldn't try to sell this house. And I'm trying to remember now, like there were real constraints there.
Keep in mind, right now, the parking lot under the dental building goes right up to the structure wall here. So if you would have to subdivide this property, which means you would subdivide it into the existing parking lot now. So you would have enough for a driveway to come through here. This is just a subdivision. What you would do is you'd subdivide and create this parcel.
Good. I know we looked at that in greater depth, and I thought we agreed not to take that off the table. Okay.
This is another option. This
I'm
is,
sorry, I
Yep.
had my hand up.
I'm sorry, Rich, I didn't see you. My bad. I'm sorry. I can't see everybody.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, my recollection of scenario 8 is that it's got the worst of all worlds, that you'd have a difficult time redeveloping 408, and you'd have the driveway immediately adjacent to the house if you could put it there. You've lost square footage. You've got the tandem parking, and there's no housing on Sears Street. I think you've lost about 5,000 square feet in the building.
Yeah, you've lost, this is a
Is that right?
smaller footprint. This is the only one that's smaller than the other options in terms of footprints of building.
I would think the neighborhood would not be at all happy with this scenario 8, just so you know. Thanks.
Yep. Scenario 9 is a new building. We restore the older building. You have one single family home here, a little bit of additional parking, and I believe, Jay, correct me if I'm wrong, this was extending a second and third floor and over a first floor parking option, correct, Jay?
You are correct.
All right, so this was expanding, getting a little bit more square footage, and actually having a covered first floor parking. And you get some additional parking because you're not using as much for housing. And then this is, this was the same thing as this, but I don't think we had it on here, but you would be extending this over again. So you'd have an extended, oh no, I'm sorry, this is a fourth floor. This is a fourth floor option. So this is putting 4 floors versus 3, where you're still capturing parking here and putting 4 floors. So it's getting more square footage, putting 4 floors here and still gaining parking spaces, and then gaining housing over here as well.
Jason, if we were comparing these in the 37 square foot building, it seems that building a second and third floor over parking is pretty efficient. Could we do that and shrink the overall footprint of the basic building to still end up with 37,000 feet instead of adding 9,000? Do we need 46?
I think this is, well, I think yes. I think at the end of the day, you were really trying to consolidate offices under one roof to the best of your ability. You know, if you start, I don't know that it's as simple as, you know, cutting back on the footprint of the building. You know, I don't think it's as simple as that. I thought we had some conversation about this as well, but I can't remember off the top of my head. But this was the ability to expand a little bit and provide some additional square footage.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is the same square footage, but rather than going extending out, because you know, part of the challenge when you start to extend out, then you have a lot of center space versus space along windows. So you have a lot of internal, no natural light on the internal part of the building. You know, you make the larger the building, you know, sometimes the more challenging it can be to cut it up effectively. But so this kind of goes vertical versus out. And I think if I remember correctly, we did some analysis of heights around the area, and even a 4-story building wasn't as high as some of the adjacent properties. Like the temple over here, I think was higher than that. Does that make sense? Is that right, Jay?
Yeah, there's a temple and there's an apartment building on the corner of Farm and Tioga as well. It's one of the larger ones.
It looks like you could do the scenario 10 with the second and third floor extension and not go to 4 stories, but get the square footage. Is that
That's number 9. Yes, I think that's number 9 here. You mean, I see what you're saying. Keep this and extend that over.
Yeah.
It's probably possible. I mean, these were pillars. You probably will lose some parking because these were going to be, if I remember correctly, these were columns or support columns. Yeah, they were support columns. Yeah, you might lose a little parking as a result of it, but I think it can be done. Here's again, I think, a summary of the options with the floors. One thing I should add too is the number 8, the one with the 32,000 square feet, was 4 floors, not 3, because there was no use of the red building. That was the narrow option there. Parking, this was a kind of a parking ratio of current uses, which I don't think is well off in terms of gain. So you had total parking spots, additional parking spots, a percentage increase, and then parking per FTE. I think one of the things we thought was interesting is when we started to do counts of use. The use was between 10 and 20 cars. Does that sound about right, Jay? And around 10 to 20 cars over in the lot. This is pre-COVID that took advantage of it. Some of those, I think there were some folks from DSS, maybe one or two folks from mental health as well. So it wasn't all downtown in terms of this campus. We thought it was going to be more, and it just didn't seem to be more. So I say that because if we're looking at expanding parking, a 20 to 15 to 25 spaces can probably capture the vast majority of it.
But that number of 20 parking spaces being used pre-COVID, though, doesn't take into account combining offices and consolidating offices in that one area. So there'd be more personnel. So there'd be more spaces used, more likely.
It did, but I thought, Jay, we incorporated that in these numbers, potential additional spots, right?
Yeah, I believe we did when we looked at the other departments and who drove into work.
Why do you think that is? Is that just people? Some people aren't there nobody's there at the same time.
I don't know. I mean, you do capture a lot of, when I say downtown campus, that I mean is this campus, right? These buildings here. I think you capture a lot of the parking here in the existing lots. If you get here at a time in the morning and you're not going to get a space, you're going to park elsewhere. But I don't think it. I think sometimes everyone experienced the inconvenience once or twice, so you think the issue's bigger than it is, and at the end of the day, it just wasn't. I was expecting double that number, and it just didn't fit. Just didn't seem to happen that way. So I just think that once you experience it once or twice, you think it's probably a bigger issue than it really is.
Remind me how many FTEs that we're using on this table?
I don't know. We'd have to pull it up again, Martha. I'm sorry. I don't have that off the top of my head.
Okay.
It's probably close to 110 or so because this is 107. So your FTE per it's probably around 112, 115 at the most, I would think.
So it's interesting. If you take the 65 in the first column, and you add 20, so you get to 85. It may be just that really is the tipping point, that it isn't that you have twice the need for for spaces. It's that you need some more extra, but not as many as 40 or 50 or something like that. So it suggests that maximizing, using as much space as possible for parking is really not necessary. And that, are there any changes in staffing? And do we have to do any more for the state courts? Do we have to provide some for the third and their staff?
Well, they've already taken, so you did take no, we didn't add another parking space for the third judge, right? Because there were 4 spaces for judges. We added a dedicated space for the DA, a dedicated space for the clerk, and 6 dedicated spaces for legislators. So, and another dedicated space for facility maintenance. So there are less spaces than there were, say, a year ago. Staffing isn't going to change a whole lot in this scenario with these departments, a few positions here or there. So I don't think that'll have a huge impact to it. The issue I think is, one of the issues that comes into play is the DA's office, and the DA's office is pretty tight. If you've been up there lately, I mean, they actually probably have the most inconvenient space and layout. And the grand jury room. So right now, the courts basically told the DA they can't use one of the existing courtrooms the grand jury room. So they're using the COFA annex right now as the grand jury room, which thankfully we have. But I think when you look at, when we talk about the longer term picture, wherever the district attorney is located, there's going to need to be a security element to it. It doesn't necessarily mean a security guard, but there has to be some security element to it. And if there's an approach that we're going to take that's going to incorporate that, we may want to incorporate it with all of a total look at all of the facilities, or where all the offices are, rather than trying to piecemeal two security options. I haven't talked intricately with the DA, but obviously security, it's going to be a secure office somehow, whether it's a buzz-in like they have now, or whether I don't know that it needs to have a security guard and electron, magnetometer and everything along those lines. But security is part of the discussion.
And wasn't the plan to put them into the old jail?
It was. That was part of the original thought process. But that we may want to reevaluate. We'd have to reevaluate as to how that's going to look. Plus, with a grand jury room, how because you're going to be committing probably at least half a floor to a grand jury room, if not more.
Because we don't want necessarily the whole office building to have the same security. If they were to go into whatever this main new office building is, then everybody would be subject to that level of security, right?
Not necessarily. You can still have an open. Well, so for example, City Hall has a security guard, but they have open access to the public, so people can go in and access the public and get their public services, whether it's a clerk's office, assessment office, which are probably the two major ones, and then the Board of Elections. That can easily be done, but leaving the open public area going into a secure space may be a different process. I mean, that's kind of something that you have to work through to go through, and those other departments may not need that open access to the public, as with the public facing ones like assessment, county clerk, and the Board of Elections. The fact that we've had the building secure now here at the old jail has worked out very well for us, and that it's not free, open, and unmonitored. And people, when they come for appointments, they have an easy access and a buzz-in to be able to get into the department. I mean, it's worked out very well. I don't know that we'll change that, because it's not a need to be open to the public freely as say assessment needs to be, or the county clerk needs to be. So I think security has to be part of a discussion, and what are the needs, because assigned counsel will have also a secure need as well.
Thank you.
Yep. So this is just sampling of offers. This at the time was in terms of what we do to promote alternatives to parking, and I don't think. Obviously, this has not materialized the park and ride. This is obviously, this is all pre-COVID. So, there's some things here that may be delayed or didn't come to fruition. I know this was discussed, and I think there's still probably interest to this at some point in time in terms of the park and ride, but these are other options. Bike share, I don't think that came back this year. And whether it comes back in the future, I don't know. Car share still exists. County obviously offers free TCAP bus passes, and then there's discussion around how we can work on some traffic management. The financial analysis I think needs to be updated, because it is, I think this is from 2019, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it. I don't think it's gone backwards, but it's probably increased in terms of the construction costs with it. This is probably something, if we want to get into, we should spend a little bit of time updating. Remember, we were going to, as we are with any major improvements to facilities, looking at improvements and making them net zero to the extent that they can be. So again, I have not revisited this, and it's probably something that we would look at again if we were to update costs and so on and so forth. I do think that we would investigate a geothermal option for a new construction over on Tioga Street. Here are just some energy summaries again. Again, I think we would revisit this if we want to have more discussion on.
Yeah.
Oops. Yeah, so that was back, I think that was back in the 19. So it could support a new building. There is additional parking. There are residential options. And at the time, and I think it's still true, the county can support the project financially at this point. So before I end the share, is there any slide you want me to go back to talk about any scenario? Okay, there we go.
Thank you, Jason. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
I guess at this point, I'll throw it open discussion with the group and see what scenarios float to the top, and then we can vote on the most popular ones and kind of pick a list of 2 or 3 top options that would be something we'd be interested in doing down the road. So anybody got anything?
I was wondering whether there was any public comment. We didn't.
No, we didn't have any yet.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Rich?
Yeah, I do know that the neighbors were aware of the meeting and were interested in it. I don't know if the technology is keeping people from speaking, but I would anticipate, given the many conversations I've had, that scenarios where we would leave parking the way it is on Sears Street, that we went to 4 stories, those are going to be far more unpopular. Just, pretty consistently. That seemed to be the view of the neighborhood.
Okay. Mike? Oh, I'm sorry.
If we're going to assume that we're not going to keep it all for parking and we're going to have a building there, I'd like to talk about scenario 9, which I think gives some housing. It gives us a reasonable amount of parking, and it gives us a 3-story building. And apparently keeps 408 Tioga Street. Not my favorite part of it, but that's what in many of the suggestions here.
Okay. Annie?
Thank you for the presentation, Jason. So as scenarios 9 and 10 have always been my favorite for a couple of reasons. One of the things is it doesn't have tandem parking. I'm really opposed to the tandem parking, creating any more of that. But also because it seems good use of the site, and both scenarios provide some level of housing on Sears Street. And that's it.
Okay. I like scenario 10, about 9 and 10 both. I would like to have the building overhang the parking lot on 10, to cut down from 4 stories to 3 if possible. Other than that,
So Dave, just for clarity, what you're suggesting is basically this number 9 just with housing here. You're suggesting a 3-story building extending over parking and converting all of the Sears Street property into residential. Is that what you're saying? Just so I understand what you're suggesting.
You talking to me?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry, Dave. I was just trying to get clarity on what you were saying. You were basically saying you like the scenario 10, just not the 4-story building, instead the 3-story building with the overhang over parking here.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. It's not a scenario, but it's a blend of 9 and 10.
Right.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Rich and Martha have their hands up.
Whoever had the hand up first. Rich, I guess, probably.
Either way, I was just going to say, I don't really favor 9. I mean, when we say it does have some housing, it would be one house. You don't have the street wall on Sears Street. You would have a pass through. People would continue to use it as a walkway. And I know that's been a problem lately in the neighborhood, especially with us leaving it empty, is that there's been some unfortunate use of the space. And I think that would encourage that. But also, I think in terms of neighborhood, having developed housing on Sears Street would put that street back the way it was, and it would be, would be better.
Rich, just one question. Supposing we went to, hang on a minute. Supposing we went to 10 with the overhang. Okay. Are we proposing a single driveway to feed the back end of those 3 houses?
No.
Or multiple driveways? Because that will considerably cut down on parking spaces on the
Yeah,
street.
I think it says parking to be adjacent to house. I guess you could bring it in from the back, but I think this plan contemplates it coming off of Sears Street. Certainly there could be a shared driveway between 2 of the houses. And the house that's not in the plan, but southernmost, I think currently has an easement. And you might be able to reconfigure so that that driveway was shared. And that would probably be the way to get the biggest preservation of parking along Sears Street. But Sears Street is very narrow, so you really can only have parking on one side, I think, anyway.
Yeah, this did not contemplate drive-through parking through this property, the county property exists. I think there were parking along the sides of the structures, accessing it from Sears Street.
With that said, David, I think your idea of 10A or 9.5, where you combine the 2 plans, that's workable.
I would like to see that. And I'm thinking about this. So if you go to 9. So the spaces, I'm pointing to my computer screen. The spaces south of the one house. Okay, the number of spaces, on that you lose, where if you put housing there, you lose that. That's 15 spaces if I count right. Jason, you'd said when you by putting the canopy, the overhang, you lose some parking because of the pillars. So the net here is 40, right? Plus or minus. If we put, excuse me, if you put the overhang, but you put housing along Sears, whether it's duplexes or 3 or whatever it is, if you use all this parcels along Sears, so you lose 15 there, but you can pick up a couple because you don't have to get through. You see where the driveway expands to the west a little bit. You pick up a couple there. At any rate, so you're certainly in the neighborhood. So 40 minus 15, 25. You're certainly in the ballpark of the number of spaces. You're more than the number of spaces you say our staff was using pre-COVID. If you can pick up 25, 28.
You're probably around 20 spaces at the end of the day. Keep in mind, you're going to have to take this out. You're going to have to put this probably over here in terms of refuse and trash collection. So you may lose a space or 2 over here. You're going to have a place to put snow. So, I mean, you're probably going to be anywhere between 15 to 20 spaces here, one way or another. I think that's probably going to meet your need in terms of overflow. So, I mean, to answer your question, yes, just keep in mind, this right here is going to go probably, it's not going to be under anything. It's going to be over here.
I don't know where you're pointing.
I'm sorry, the space and trash collection here, it's probably going to go to this part of the parking lot, most likely. You'll gain a few spaces with this wall here. You'll gain a few spaces with this here because this is now the new property line, right here. You won't have a pass through anymore. So I think you're probably in the ballpark of 15 to 20, maybe a little more than 20, somewhere in the 20 range. I mean, that, yeah.
No, in other words, the net, if you use parking, if you use that parking on the left for housing instead, and you could also make the overhang a little, not take up that entire space. Maybe you don't lose so much space with you take out one set of pillars or something. It feels like you're close enough that you could make this work with an overhang, so we keep it to 3 stories. And still end up with 20 to 25 parking spaces in the building and 3 or whatever full housing along Sears Street. So I would love to see exploring that. Guess that's where I'm headed. That we figure out what the details are that make that a possible solution. Feels like we get enough parking, we get the maximum housing, and the new building isn't 4 stories.
Dave?
Mike Lane has a question.
Yeah, Mike.
I don't think having all of the property on Sears Street for housing has to be a given. Let's say you go with the 2 houses on the north. You can still not build a house for the 3rd spot and still have additional parking there for that scenario 10, if that's what you're interested in, or 9 rather.
I think you lose a lot of space circulating to try to get into those corner parking spaces.
Well, I'm not sure about that.
You'd have to flop it on its side. You wouldn't be going, you'd rotate that corner, and that parking would be perpendicular, or parking would be parallel to Sears Street and Tioga Street versus perpendicular now. That's probably the only way you'd be able to fit. Does that make sense, Jay? So let's say you did a second property below the existing single family home. So if you can see my cursor, you put a structure here, right? You're going to take this remaining area and you're going to rotate it. So parking will be parallel to, the cars would be parallel to Sears Street versus perpendicular like they are now. Right, Jay?
Let me throw another wrinkle in there, Jason.
Yeah.
What if you came straight off the driveway to a parking lot, left the separation there, and put the second house down towards where the garbage is down
Put the
there.
parking in between the properties. Yeah, you could.
It's more accessible.
You probably could. I mean, I think, now we're getting this schematic. I mean, you probably could do it, Dave. You already have it here, this entryway. The question, I don't know why you couldn't, but it's going to be, what you're talking about doing is probably, again, you're moving this somewhere. So this is either going to be moved here or here. And as you entry in this area, you're going to have parking, coming parallel to Sears Street and then parallel to Sears Street this way. I don't know the distances and how wide these roadways have to be. So.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that might be an easier scenario for access to the parking is all.
Could be. You got to have the ability for cars to come out and pass each other. So.
Right. Okay. Anybody else?
Annie has her question up, or hand up. I'm sorry.
Annie.
Thank you. So I just want to. Martha just kept saying about the spaces, having enough spaces for the overflow that's there now. I just want to remind folks that it's not just for the people that are parking over there now, the 10 to 20 people, but it's also any departments, whether it's the human rights or whatever other departments that could get moved around. And then we're also often adding a person, like we have a new person coming in very soon, moving from Kansas. We're talking about adding a new person to, new positions for the coming year. So just think about that for, it's not just the 10 to 20, we could need more.
I think this provides some growth factor, and it also keeping in mind you would have this building, I don't think would be fully occupied. I also think this moves planning over there, so you would still have available space. Some it's cut up, but you'd have some space in the existing building, the legislature building.
And I do appreciate Mike Lane saying, because he's long been saying, like one house, and I do want to just say that I hear him saying that, he'd be willing to compromise on possibly two lots, and I'd be willing to compromise too on having 2 or 3 lots for houses there too.
Okay, folks, let's try to wrap this up in the next 3 minutes here. Kind of make a decision. Do we want to concentrate on this particular scenario or a couple of these? Because we're going to need to move into executive session pretty quickly here.
Yeah, I think we should concentrate on this one, but about the number of parking spots we need, I'm going to throw in the green capital plan goal of reducing our commuter parking, our employee commutes. And there's a classic, if you build it, they'll come. If you make the freer and more available you make parking, the less possible it is to get people out of their cars. I mean, you really, really are going in the wrong direction if you build parking for the maximum number of people you think might need it. Then that's really counter to what we've said is our goal.
Well, I would just say to that we have to think about what our employees that we have and what they will be doing and where they live. And they live all over the place. And they live in county, they live out of county, they live in the city, and they live out of the city. I think it's only reasonable that we have areas where they can bring their vehicles. Hopefully in the future there'll be electric vehicles. But
right. Electric or not, I mean, there's the parking. The idea for the city and DIA was not remote parking, but parking, say, at the Wegmans lot with shuttle buses coming in. I think there are convenient ways, and there will be more development of convenient ways for people to come in without bringing their single occupancy vehicle directly to this site.
if we make people do things like that, they'll have to, but doesn't mean they're going to be happy employees.
Okay.
Rich has a question.
Yeah, if I might, I was just going to comment on that. The conversation we had pre-COVID, and it's hard to even remember pre-COVID, but we did go through pretty much this same conversation. And one of the things we really touched on was we can't make the property do more than it can do. And that we also wanted to be good neighbors, that we wanted to set an example from a planning standpoint and a community revitalization standpoint. And for that reason, restoring the street wall that had been there on Sears Street is really a critical element of making this neighborhood function the way it had. Leaving gaps in it is, I believe, just not ideal. So, my opinion, and that's the conversation I think we were having last fall when we were all not thinking pandemic.
Okay, that being said, everybody gets a vote. What scenarios do we want Jason to look at here for possible use? I'll start out. I'm going to say 10A.
What's 10?
Martha's 10?
Yeah,
No,
I
no,
would
what's-
second that.
Wait, what's 10A? I'm sorry.
10A is the one I proposed where the lot comes straight in off the driveway.
10A.
Parking-
What?
I would like to include 9 to be looked at as well as 10 in the future. You know, I think if we're beginning to try to refine it more, we could look at both of those. They seem to be where most people are talking.
I got lost here. Is there a 10A?
That was Rich's definition of what I suggested.
Well, I think it's also the overhang, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, with the overhang.
Yeah.
Okay.
2 stories with the
Just-
overhang in the parking lot.
If you have
And
the overhang to bring it down to 3 stories
Yeah,
and then
Just
3
one
houses.
clear.
on Sears Street.
10A is the 3-story overhang building and what residential? 1, 2,
2.
2 residential.
2?
Right. I thought that makes sense to start with 9 because you've got the overhang, but you're saying start with 10, but add an overhang to 10?
Yes.
Okay, then that's good. I like 3 housings. I like 3 housing units and see if we can make it work. And the overhang might make it work.
Just for clarity. Scenario 10A is 3-story municipal building with an overhang over ground floor parking and 3 residential units along Sears Street.
2 residential units.
Yeah, 2.
2 residential units. Okay. So that's 10A, 2 residential units.
Oh, I was saying 3.
Okay.
Oh,
So-
I would vote for 3. I would vote for housing on Sears Street.
Okay.
I'm
I need 10A and B.
going to prioritize 3 housing units as well.
Very well. Annie?
I'm fine with 2 or 3, as I said, and the overhang or not. I could go either way. So, and I'd be fine with 4 stories or 3 stories. So do we have a 10A? Is 2 residential units or 3 now? Or do we have 10A and B?
Just somebody tell me which one you want, 2 or 3?
You're doing this and this, right?
2 or 3? 2 or 3?
I think I don't think you have a majority of the committee for either 2 or 3 at this point.
That may be.
Yeah, I think it's kind of split.
That's why I think you need the 2 options to look at.
Okay,
do
Jason, is that
10A?
enough for you to go on?
Well, what I'm hearing is that there is interest. I think a 4-story building is out of the mix. Is that correct? We're sticking with just a 3-story building. Like saying maybe not.
Yeah, the
I'm
purpose
open
of the
to
overhang,
4 stories.
Okay.
the purpose of the overhang is to try to get away from 4 stories. Now, they can also work that the overhang is 4 stories. You know, when you, a lot of times a building will, from the street, if you sort of hide the top story by pushing it back, it feels
Yeah.
like a 3-story when half of it's a 4-story building.
You could do that. That will give you some more square footage, which isn't a bad thing.
Which also might allow you to shrink the overhang area and therefore lose fewer spaces to pillars.
I don't know if that's going to be practical. I mean, that space is not that huge at the end of the day, Martha. I mean, it looks that way, but I don't think you're going to be able to cut it, dice it that way, that many ways. But you know, what we can do is, if you want to take I mean, basically you've narrowed it down to 2 options and then kind of have another option in between there with basically a 3-story overhang building with 2 residential versus 1. I mean, so you have probably 3 options to consider, you know, 9, 10, and then 10 AB, you know, whatever you want to call it, 10A, which is a 2 residential option. You could have a 3 residential option with a 3-story as well. So maybe you have four options to consider right now. That's basically what I'm hearing.
I like to just get a quick run down by Arel and see what he thinks about it. Put you on the spot, Arel.
What do you think, Arel?
Yeah, I'm open to what the committee would like to do. I think any of those scenarios that you've thrown out there are all possible structurally. I mean, you're paying more structurally to do the overhangs, but there's a lot of buildings in town that have done that to maximize parking on that ground level.
Okay, thank you.
Really, I'll kind of break it down to you. Cost-wise, the commitment to a 3-story overhang versus a 4-story no overhang is really going to be the decision of probably cost differential. The residential piece is really not a cost differential to you. It's really a policy discussion as to you want to, a parking lot, whether it's you're putting 2 residential, 1 residential, or 3 residential, really isn't going to impact anything at the end of the day in terms of grand scope of the project. So, in order to kind of if you were to look at cost and try to fine tune it, the difference between a 3-story overhang and a 4-story no overhang is really a decision that would point us in the right direction. Whether you do 1, 2, or 3 residential buildings is really not, it doesn't really weigh on the project. Would that be a good categorization of it, Arel?
Yeah.
Okay. Very well. I guess at this point, we've beat this one to death, and it's time to move on to other subjects. So like a motion to go into executive session.
To discuss.
Annie and Rich. Okay. So Katrina, you can go ahead and give us a holler when you got things set up.
Okay.
And the purpose to discuss real estate matters.
I'm sorry, Rich, you broke up.
The purpose, he said.